Okay, things are going to pick up quite a bit now, so bear with me. Um, the last where we ended off last was we generated these key pairs, right? Um, what I've done now is I've added a Mixin object to our API class. So we have this API object up here, right? What I've done is I've created a Mixin class very similar to the account that we did previously, right? We have this Mixin object, and we're creating it when the API is being created. So it's exactly like that account object, except now it's called Mixin. And this object is going to essentially deal with any sort of interaction with the Mixin network. So as you can see here, we're creating a function called createUser, and in the wallet down here we're indexing into the Mixin object, and we're calling that createUser function, and we're passing it a callback right here. So if everything goes well, we're going to redirect the user to the account route, and then so we're passing that callback function, right? And then on top of that, we're passing the private key, the public key, and the pin that the user supplied us. So this pin up here that we typed in earlier, and then the public private key pair that we had just generated, right? All we're doing is we're passing that into this Mixin object, which has its own createUser method. So let's take a look at the createUser method and see what it does. You can see here we have the callback, the private key, the public key, and the pin. Right here what we're doing is we're stripping out the RSA dash 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 RSA public key, right? Like that usually goes on top of an RSA key. You can see we're pulling these out. So we're only handling like the digits, the actual public key, and not the like, you know, here's the beginning of a public key, the end of an RSA public key. We're going to put these into a param object as the session secret. We're going to call the session secret the public key, and then we're going to generate a UUID for the quote-unquote full name of the user. Okay, so that's essentially everything the createUser method does for now. We might be adding functionality to it later at a later date, but it sort of prepares the data for this API.request call. And so here, as I said before, the API object is going to have a whole boatload of functionality here, and you can see all the code that I've written here. You can see our notify function that we had previously, right? And on top of that, we're just adding a couple more functions like send, request, and sign off authentication token. We'll be talking about these in detail coming up shortly. So in this case, all we're doing here is we're calling the request method that I had just defined over here in index.js. We're passing it post, we're passing it the route we want to make the request to, and then the parameters, and of course another callback here. So all we're doing is generating a callback, and if there's an error, we're going to call back into the callback that we passed into the createUser function originally, right? So you can see here this is a post that we want to make to the users. Essentially, the request function that we've written here, right? We want to be able to just say post to this route these parameters, and that's essentially what this API.request function is going to do for us, right? So if we take a look at that, right here we have this function request that we've defined here. It has a method that's in this case is post. It has a path, it has parameters, and then it has the callback that we defined earlier there. So you can see here we're creating the URL, and this URL is actually going to make us hit a Mixin node that's on the actual Mixin network, right? So at this point we're actually going to be sending requests to Mixin nodes. This is how you do the RPC calls that we talked about in the white paper originally, right? So in this case it's api.mixin.1, and then the path and the call that we made earlier was to users, right? Because this is a createUser function, we're going to post to the user's route. From there, we're going to check if the route is actually a user's route. In this case, you can see the comment that I've made. We're creating a new user. So what we're going to do is we're going to use those keys that we had generated in like the very first video for coding, right? We created our own client ID, our app session ID, and we put those all into the webpack.config.js, right? Well, we actually get these in as like environment variables now that we've done that, right? So what we're going to do is if this is a user's route, this means we're creating a new user, and that means they don't have a user ID, they don't have a session ID, they don't have a private key, etc., etc. So we're just going to use ours. And the Mixin network, since we've registered as a developer, the Mixin network knows, okay, you're a valid developer, because you've gone through all the registration and everything. We're going to let you on the network, and we're going to let you create users, and that's what we're doing here, right? So if we take a look at this sign authentication token, you're going to be using this sign authentication token method very frequently, because it's essentially signing data for you to pass to the Mixin nodes, right? So that's what we have here. Up here is the sign authentication token. It takes a UID, in this case it was our client ID, it takes an SID, this is our session ID, it takes a private key, in this case it's our private key, not the private key that the user generated originally when they created a new wallet. It takes a method, in this case the method is the post method, right, that we were originally passed in way back, a couple pages back in the code. It takes a path, in this case the path is the users, right? We're passing that in as a URI to the sign authentication token method, and then the parameters. And the parameters are just simply the parameters that we had prepared up here. In this case it's a session secret with the user's public key, and then a quote-unquote full name, which is the UUID set to lowercase, right? So we're passing all these things in, and essentially what we want to get out is a signed JSON web token, I think is what we're signing down here. So essentially, in order to do this, though, we have to like massage the data in various ways in order to get it into a format that we're actually going to be able to use to sign something, right? To sign something and send it back to the Mixin network. So in this case, we're checking if the parameters are JSON, if it's a JSON object. If it is, then we're going to stringify that JSON object. If they're undefined or they're null, this allows us to pass, nothing as parameters and still sign something as an empty string. Otherwise, we're going to assume this is a string already, and we're not going to have to do anything to it. We're going to set an expiry time on the signature, essentially. So if it takes too long to sign, the signature will time out and it won't be valid anymore. And then we're going to take a SHA-256 hash of the method. In this case, the method was post of the URI. In this case, it was users, and then body. In this case, the body was the parameters that we passed in way back where we had generated them, right? We're going to create a header and we're setting the type as a JSON web token, and we're going to use RS512 as the algorithm. So we're going to set this header and then set the payload with all the data that we've just created up above, right? We're going to turn the 256 hash into a hexadecimal. We're going to stringify all this stuff, and then we're going to sign it. So it looks very complex what we're doing, but at the end of the day, what we're really looking for is a signed transaction, and we're just kind of massaging everything in the way we want it, and then signing it with the private key, essentially. And in this case, again, this is our app's private key, but if the route getting passed to this request function is ever anything other than a user, then it will be signed by the user themselves rather than our application, essentially. So at this point, we've created this JSON web token, and it's signed and everything's valid, essentially. Like at this point, you're assuming that you have a valid signature of the data that you've passed into this request function. And the last thing we need to do is send this to the Mixin network. So we've already created this URL, and essentially at this point it's just a trivial AJAX call. So we're just going to send the token that we've signed down here to the route that we specified up here, because we know that the Mixin network is listening to this user's route, right? So we're going to send this along. Again, this is a pretty standard AJAX call. You're just setting various parameters and then passing the params that you've used previously to sign everything. But you have to pass in this token, so that the Mixin network is aware that this is a valid set of parameters that we're sending on. From there, it's just standard JavaScript stuff, right? We're going to make a bunch of callbacks in the case of errors and all these other things. This code again will be added to the GitHub repo, so you'll know how to make AJAX calls to the Mixin network pretty easily if you just copy this format essentially of the code and replicate it wherever you need to sign transactions on the Mixin network and make requests and all this other stuff. Like, honestly, when I'm going to go build my own projects on the Mixin network, I'm going to copy this code verbatim and reuse it because I know it works. I know it's been tested. I know the signatures are all valid and all that stuff. So essentially, that is us creating a user on the Mixin network. The next thing we need to do is like take the user's PIN and cache it in the browser and all that other stuff, which we'll do in the next video. But for this one, I just want to make sure that it works. I just want to test it out and make sure that we're getting what we expect. Which, I mean, there's not much for us to print out here to ensure that it works. But I mean, what we can do is, you know, make sure there are no console errors or anything like that while we're going through this. We can test again that the Node stuff is working, of course. Let's give it a full 6-digit PIN. We're creating that we want to create a user and all that other stuff. But what's happening behind the scenes is we're actually making this call, right? And everything's happening behind the scenes to generate that those key pairs and everything else. The thing is, we're not calling the callback yet, right? So we'll do that in the next video as well. But I figured, you know, this is a lot of stuff to digest, so I wanted to keep this video relatively short. But it's a very important video, right? Like, this is essentially how to interact with the Mixin network, right? It's just a matter of passing in different paths, signing different objects to do different things, right? In this case, we're creating a user, but pretty much any valid, you know, sort of RPC calls that you can find in the documentation can be done with this code. So it's very important code to be passing along to you. Okay, in the next video, like I said, what we're going to do is we're going to generate the PIN, and then we're going to send some responses back, and hopefully we'll be into the account page at that point. I'll see you in the next video.